But first tonight, Penny Wong caught out ignoring warnings that money sent to agencies in Gaza would end up in the hands of terrorists. We can reveal that tomorrow on the front page of the Adelaide Advertiser are revelations that Australia has sent a total of $200 million to UNRWA since 2010. $200 million. We're going to bring you that front page report from the Adelaide Advertiser in a moment. From the very night of the terror attacks, when families were still being slaughtered in Israel in cold blood, Penny Wong called for restraint from Israel. Then 1 week later, on October the 14th, she announced $10 million in funding for Gaza. This was inexplicable at the time. The Israeli response had barely begun, the ground offensive in Gaza certainly hadn't started, and here was Australia committing millions to their enemy and nothing for Israel. 12 days later, another $15 million. And that's when we asked Penny Wong if she was concerned that Hamas might exploit the money provided to Gaza for terror. We asked what oversight there was for how this funding would be managed. In response, Penny Wong sent us an answer from DFAT, and they said that our humanitarian agreements with partners have strict counter-terrorism, anti-fraud and anti-corruption requirements, which are closely monitored and applied. This is nonsense. There's no close monitoring of Hamas, which is the governing body in Gaza. If Penny Wong herself believed that response from DFAT, that there was close monitoring of any officials in Gaza, of Hamas for God's sake, then you'd be right to question whether she's naive or foolish. Australia has no presence in Gaza, and there's no guarantee that our taxpayer dollars were being spent as they were meant to help innocent civilians. Evidence has mounted over many years that international aid is exploited to support terrorism, including weapons and the financing of Gaza's network of 500 kilometres of underground tunnels. There's a reason Hamas has had enough fuel to power rockets, but the Gazan hospitals don't have energy to operate medical equipment. There's a reason Hamas leaders are worth $11 billion while Palestinians are impoverished. And there's a reason schools and hospitals are third world, while there's a never-ending supply of weapons to fire against Israel and a sophisticated underground tunnel network. As you know, we've spoken about this topic on this show over and over again, including just last week when we showed many examples of UNRWA employees, including teachers, celebrating the terror attacks on October 7. And yet still, with all of this evidence, Penny Wong wasn't moved and obstinately continued to pour millions of dollars into questionable agencies in Gaza. Now, of course, it's important that food and medical supplies be given to innocent Palestinian citizens. Children and families shouldn't have to suffer because of Hamas's cruelty. But this wasn't aid or food or water. In total, since October 7, this is $46.5 million in total aid to Palestinian territories. Now, it wasn't just us on this show raising the issue publicly. We learned today in the Australian newspaper that Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong ignored warnings on the UN agency's links to Hamas in Gaza from multiple Jewish groups and business leaders. They said that there was mounting evidence that UNRWA had aided Hamas in the massacre of Israelis. In fact, the evidence around UNRWA dates back to 2015, when United Nations Watch reported that UNRWA officials were operating 12 Facebook accounts inciting terrorism. Also that year, UN Watch reported that UNRWA employees were inciting the murder of Jews on social media. Despite those revelations and the follow-up UNRWA promises, teachers again incited violence against, and I quote, Jewish apes and pigs just a few months later. Then in 2017, another report that UNRWA teachers were inciting jihadist terrorism and anti-Semitism. Again in 2019, teachers were once again exposed, In 2021, UN teachers celebrated the deaths of Israelis, and then another report in 2022 and March 2023, and on it goes. So how could all of this have come as a shock to Penny Wong or UNRWA itself? The evidence has been overwhelming. Yet United Nations officials claimed they were horrified to learn of UNRWA staff ties to Hamas terror.
The Secretary-General is horrified by this news and asked Mr. Lazzarini to investigate this matter swiftly and to ensure that any UNRWA employee shown to have participated or abetted in what transpired on October 7th or in any other criminal activity be terminated immediately and referred for potential criminal prosecution.
The UN said that of the 12 UNRWA employees who were believed to have been involved in the October 7 terror attacks, 9 have now been sacked, 1 is dead, and the UN says 2 others are still being identified. But as for Penny Wong, she ignored all evidence that linked UNRWA to terrorism and instead kept increasing the amount of money Australia was handing over. She defended the fact that she was still sending money to UNRWA just a week and a half ago, telling us when we asked that UNRWA is the only organisation that can provide basic services to the Palestinians and that Australia will hold it accountable for its adherence to principles of, and I quote, tolerance, non-discrimination, equality and neutrality. This was a fanciful comment because on October 7, UNRWA employees were celebrating the terror attacks and calling for jihad against Jews. The idea that Australian officials would be holding Hamas to account for adherence to principles of tolerance and non-discrimination is laughable. And Penny Wong also raised this issue with Palestinian authorities during her recent trip to the Middle East.
This is an issue I raised with the Palestinian Authority, expressed my continued expectation about those funds being used appropriately. I expressed to them that it was extremely important, given the focus on this, that any funds Australia provides are used appropriately for the provision of the services that we are seeking to fund. And we wanted to make sure that there was appropriate transparency around that. And work with them to ensure that that is the case.
It was only when on the weekend that the United States and other like-minded countries suspended their funding after Israel uncovered evidence of UNRWA's participation on October 7 that Wong's hand was forced. Perhaps reluctantly, perhaps through gritted teeth, we don't know, she announced that funding would be suspended. The media has reported that this outcome was a shock.
The news has sent shockwaves across the region and through the international aid community, the biggest relief organisation in Gaza, to lose funding for now at least from its biggest donors, Britain included.
And bizarrely, there are many international figures who say that the aid should continue to roll to UNRWA despite the evidence linking the agency and its workers to the terror attacks. The coalition today said money should never have gone to UNRWA.
There are very well-documented concerns about UNRWA and the way in which it controls its spending and the people that it employs, particularly in Gaza. That includes using anti-Semitic material and pro-terrorist content in their school books that are taught in UNRWA schools. That includes allegations that funds from UNRWA have been siphoned and given to Hamas to pay for their tunnels and other activities. And it includes allegations that UNRWA employees were directly involved on the 7th of October in the terrorist attacks.
And Shadow Minister for Home Affairs James Paterson also made the point that the Foreign Minister knew enough about the concerns to actually raise it with UNRWA when she went to the Middle East, but yet even then it didn't stop our funding.
And if the Foreign Minister knew enough when she met with the head of UNRWA in the region, when she visited, to have concerns about how Australian government money would be handled, that she needed to raise that with him, well, then the question is, should we be giving money to UNRWA at all? Let's remember that the potential alleged beneficiary of this Australian government funding is Hamas, an organisation which is listed in its entirety as a terrorist organisation.
Donald Trump, as president, by the way, stopped funding for UNRWA. and Scott Morrison redirected Australia's aid to the Pacific rather than to Gaza. But with politicians like Penny Wong in charge, there was little concern, apparently, about sending $46.5 million of your hard-earned money to Gaza, despite the very real risk that some of it would be exploited for terrorism against Jews in Israel.